been seeing things that shouldn't exist. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but now I'm certain. There's another world bleeding into ours, and I'm the only one who can see it.
Hey, are you feeling all right? You've been staring at that wall for like 5 minutes.
My roommate's voice snapped me back to reality. The strange shimmer I'd been watching on our living room wall faded away as soon as I blinked. This had been happening more frequently. Glimpses of something else occupying the same space as our world.
Earth to roommate? Hello.
I forced a smile and turned to face him.
Seriously, you've been acting weird all week. Maybe you should get some sleep.
Sleep was the last thing I wanted. That's when the visions were most vivid, most terrifying.
Whatever, man. I'm heading out for the night. Don't wait up.
As soon as the front door closed, the shimmer returned. This time, it spread across the entire wall like ripples on water. I approached it slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The air felt different near it, colder, heavier somehow. I reached out my hand. My fingers passed through what should have been solid drywall. Instead, they disappeared into a cold, gelatinous substance. I pulled back immediately, but not before feeling something on the other side brush against my fingertips. That night was the first time I crossed over completely. I didn't mean to. I was just sitting on the couch staring at the wall when suddenly the boundary between worlds seemed to dissolve around me. One moment I was in my apartment, and the next, the other side looked like our world, but wrong. The furniture was in the same places, but aged and decayed. The walls were stained with something dark that seemed to pulse slightly. The air tasted metallic and stale. I tried to return immediately, but the shimmer was gone. I was trapped. For what felt like hours, I explored this twisted version of my apartment. Everything was familiar yet distorted. Photos on the walls showed faces I recognized, but their eyes were just empty black holes. The clock on the wall ran backward. Then I heard a shuffling sound coming from what would be my roommate's bedroom. Something was in there, moving around. I froze, listening as the sound grew closer. The doorknob turned slowly. Just as the door began to open, the shimmer reappeared behind me. Without thinking, I lunged backward through it and found myself sprawled on my living room floor, gasping for breath. My roommate stood over me looking concerned.
Dude, what the hell? I just got home and found you passed out on the floor.
I couldn't tell him what had happened. He'd think I was crazy. Maybe I was. But the dirt under my fingernails and the strange viscous substance on my clothes suggested otherwise. Over the next few days, I noticed the shimmers appearing more frequently. They would form in doorways, on walls, even in mirrors. Each time, I caught glimpses of that other world. A decaying, twisted version of our reality. I started researching, looking for anyone who might have experienced something similar. That's when I found an obscure forum thread about thin places, locations where the barrier between worlds was weaker. One night, while my roommate was out, I decided to cross over intentionally. I needed to understand what was happening. The largest shimmer had formed on the bathroom mirror. I took a deep breath, recorded a quick video on my phone explaining what I was about to do, and then pressed my hand against the glass. The surface gave way like thick syrup, and I pushed through. The sensation was disorienting, like being submerged in ice water and then suddenly emerging into stifling heat. When my vision cleared, I was standing in the bathroom of the other world. Everything was wrong. The tiles were cracked and covered in a black mold that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. The mirror I'd come through showed only darkness, no reflection, no way back. I moved cautiously through the apartment. The layout was identical, but everything was in a state of decay. The air was thick with spores or dust that floated like tiny embers, and there was something else. A sound like distant whispering that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. In the living room, I found what looked like a journal on the coffee table. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the handwriting was unmistakably mine. As I read, My blood ran cold. The journal detailed months of crossing between worlds, each entry becoming more frantic than the last. According to these pages, I had been exploring this place for far longer than I remembered. The final entry was a warning. They know I can see them now. They're following me back. Don't trust what you see. Don't trust him. A door creaked behind me. I spun around to see a figure standing in the hallway. It looked exactly like my roommate, but wrong. Its proportions were slightly off, limbs too long, face too pale, and its eyes were just empty sockets, filled with that same shifting darkness I'd seen in the photographs.
You came back. We've been waiting.
The voice was not my roommate's. It was high-pitched and raspy, like several voices speaking in unison. I backed away, clutching the journal.
You don't remember us yet, but you will. You always do.
The thing that wasn't my roommate took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. I turned and ran toward the bathroom, hoping the mirror would let me back through. Behind me I heard more voices joining the first. A chorus of wrong sounds coming from things that shouldn't exist. The bathroom door was gone. Where it should have been was just a wall covered in that pulsating black substance. I was trapped. The voices grew closer. I pressed myself against the wall where the door should have been, desperately feeling for any weakness, any way out. My fingers found a seam, a slight ripple in reality. I dug my nails in and pulled with all my strength. The wall tore like wet paper, revealing a shimmer. Without hesitation, I dove through. I crashed onto my bathroom floor, the real one. The mirror above me was intact, showing only my terror. I scrambled to my feet and slammed the door shut, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. That's when I noticed something clutched in my hand. The journal from the other side. I'd brought it back with me. As my breathing slowed, I began to hear something from the other side of the door. My roommate's voice, but not quite right.
Hey, you in there? Everything okay? I heard a crash.
I didn't answer. According to the journal, the things from the other side could mimic people from our world. How could I be sure this was really my roommate?
Come on, open up. I just want to make sure you're all right.
The doorknob rattled. I held my breath.
Seriously, what's going on? You've been acting strange for weeks.
Weeks? But my roommate had only mentioned my strange behavior starting a few days ago. Unless... I opened the journal again, flipping through the pages until I found what I was looking for. An entry from what appeared to be months ago. They can replace people. They study them, learn to mimic them, then take their place. I think they've replaced my roommate. The real one is probably still over there, trapped like I was.
Last chance. Open this door or I'm calling someone.
I remained silent, reading more of the journal. According to my own handwriting, I had been crossing between worlds for nearly a year. Each time, my memory of previous crossings would fade once I returned. The things on the other side, the journal called them mimics, were using these crossings to learn about our world, preparing for something called the merging. The banging on the door stopped. I heard footsteps walking away. Then the sound of the front door opening and closing. Was it really gone? Or was it trying to trick me? I stayed in the bathroom for hours, reading the journal from cover to cover. It detailed my gradual discovery of the other world, my exploration of it, and my growing horror as I realized what was happening. The final pages contained a desperate plan, a way to seal the breaches between worlds permanently. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, the apartment was empty. On the kitchen counter was a note in my roommate's handwriting. Gone to stay with my parents for a few days. You clearly need some space. Get help. But was it really from him? Or was it from the thing pretending to be him? I couldn't be sure of anything anymore. According to the journal, the breaches were growing larger and more permanent. Soon, the two worlds would begin to merge completely. The only way to stop it was to find the original breach, the first thin place, and close it From the other side, the journal indicated that the first breach had formed in the basement storage area of our apartment building. I grabbed a flashlight in the journal, then made my way downstairs. The basement was dimly lit and maze-like, filled with chain-link storage cages containing residents' extra belongings. As I moved deeper into the space, the air grew colder. My flashlight beam seemed to penetrate less of the darkness with each step. Then I saw it, a massive shimmer covering an entire wall of the basement. Unlike the others I'd seen, this one didn't waver or fade. It was stable, permanent. Through it, I could clearly see the other side, a twisted, decaying version of the same basement. As I approached, I noticed something moving on the other side. A figure, hunched and distorted, was watching me. It pressed its hands against the barrier from its side, leaving smeared impressions in the membrane-like surface.
You don't understand what you're doing.
The voice seemed to come from inside my head rather than through the barrier.
Every time you cross over, you make it easier for us to cross into your world. Every time you return, you bring a little piece of our reality with you.
I held up the journal.
Ah, you found that. We left it for you, a breadcrumb trail to lead you back to us.
A cold realization washed over me. What if the journal was a trap? What if everything I thought I knew was just what they wanted me to believe?
Your world is dying, ours already did. The merging is inevitable, it's already begun. Look at yourself.
I glanced down at my hands and nearly screamed. My skin was pale and slightly translucent, with dark veins visible beneath the surface. How had I not noticed before? I looked back at the figure.
You've crossed over so many times that you're becoming like us, part of both worlds belonging to neither.
I backed away from the shimmer, my mind racing. If I couldn't trust the journal, what could I trust? I needed to think, to figure out what was real. As I turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Standing at the entrance to the basement was my roommate, or what looked like my roommate. Behind him were 3 more figures, all with the same slightly wrong proportions, the same empty eyes.
There you are. We've been looking everywhere for you.
They began moving toward me with that same jerky, unnatural gait. I was trapped between them and the breach.
The merging is almost complete. Soon, there won't be 2 worlds anymore. Just one. Ours.
I looked back at the shimmer. The figure on the other side was still watching, its head tilted in an impossible angle. I had a terrible choice to make. Face whatever these things were, or escape through the breach into that decaying otherworld. The creatures that weren't human anymore moved closer. I could see now that their skin had the same translucent quality mine was developing. Their mouths opened too wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. I made my decision. I turned and ran straight for the shimmer, plunging through it before I could change my mind. The sensation was worse this time, like being torn apart and reassembled incorrectly. When my vision cleared, I was on the other side. The basement here was flooded with a few inches of dark liquid that rippled with my movement. The air was thick with spores that glowed faintly. Behind me, the shimmer showed the creatures approaching from my world.
Welcome home.
I spun around to find the source of the voice. A figure emerged from the shadows. A woman, or something that had once been a woman. Her movements were more fluid than the creatures on the other side, more natural.
You don't remember me, but I remember you. You've been crossing over for years, not months. Each time, you forget a little more of who you were.
She approached me slowly, her face becoming clearer in the dim light. Despite the decay and wrongness of this place, there was something familiar about her.
The journal was true, but not in the way you think. You didn't write it to warn yourself. You wrote it to lead yourself back here, where you belong.
I looked down at my hands again. The transformation was progressing. My fingers were longer now, the joints more pronounced. I could feel something changing inside me as well, a shifting of organs and bones.
The merging isn't something they're doing to your world. It's something you're doing. Every time you cross over and back, you weaken the barrier. You're the breach.
Behind me, I could see the creatures from my world pressing against the shimmer, their faces distorted by the membrane-like surface. They couldn't cross over. Not yet.
You have a choice now. Stay here and become one of us completely, or return one last time and close the breach forever.
I looked at the journal in my hand. The pages were changing before my eyes, the words rearranging themselves into new meanings. The final page now contained instructions, a ritual to seal the breach permanently, but at a terrible cost. I had to choose. Become one of these creatures in this decaying world, or return to my own world one last time to close the breach. Knowing I would be trapped there as I continued to transform into something inhuman, I made my choice. I turned back to the shimmer and pressed my hands against it. The membrane resisted at first, then gave way. As I pushed through, I felt something fundamental changing within me. A severing of connections, a burning away of humanity. I emerged on the other side, facing the creatures that had once been human. They backed away from me now, their empty eyes showing something like fear.
What have you done?
I didn't answer. Instead, I began the ritual described in the journal's final page. Words in a language I shouldn't know but somehow did flowed from my lips. The basement began to shake. Dust and concrete falling from the ceiling. The shimmer behind me pulsed and contracted. The creatures screamed, a sound no human throat could make, and lunged toward me. But they were too late. The breach collapsed with a sound like reality tearing itself apart. In the sudden silence that followed, I stood alone in the basement. The creatures were gone, either destroyed or fled. The breach was sealed, but I remained caught between worlds, neither fully human nor fully whatever they were. That was 3 weeks ago. The transformation has slowed but not stopped. I can still pass for human if I'm careful, but I don't know how much longer that will last. I've written all this down as a warning. There are other worlds besides ours. Worlds that exist in the same space, but on different frequencies of reality. The barriers between them are thinning, and there are things in those other worlds that want to come through. If you ever see a shimmer in the air, a place where reality seems to ripple and bend, turn away. Don't look too closely. Don't reach out to. Touch it. Because once you've seen the other world, it begins to see you too, and once it sees you, it never stops watching.